What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Devy YouTube channel. We're back today. We're talking dynasty values and looking at 2024 picks. But what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break down. I'm going to show you my big board that I do for football guys, which gives you a top 36 outlook right now. Then we're going to be talking about okay, each position, where would you take that first at, right? Where would you re-roll? Would you take the 101 or Trevor Lawrence? And then we're going to look at actual dynasty trades, doing it all, just looking at everything from every position right now, how the first are being ranked, and then what you guys can expect from the incoming 2024 class. It's early, but what could you expect? Who's in that tier? We're going to be going over all of that here during this episode. So hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll dive into it on the other side. All right, let's get into it. This is the fun part. Dynasty season's wrapping up rapidly. And so people are starting to look at that 2024 class. Now, what I have on the screen right now is my big board. And what you're looking at is the top 36. Now, I know that some of these are going to be wrong. I understand that nothing is perfect. Also, I know like Carson Beck declared this was this week's version. I do this every week for football guys. He declared before we, after we already had created the graphic. But this generally gives you guys that idea of where the strength of the class is, where I have everybody ranked. Right now, I get asked this a lot about tiers. So I get asked hey, where are your tiers at right now? To me, 101, 102 is your top tier. If you have those picks, you control the draft because that's Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. After that, you're looking at 103 to 105. Malik, Drake, and Brock Bowers are in there. Now, after that, it gets a little, right? So where do you have Jaden Daniels? Right now, I have him as QB9. I'm probably lower on consensus than most on Jaden Daniels in terms of where his value is. Some people have him as 106. Some people have him a better fantasy asset of May because of his rushing upside. At this point, I don't think it really matters. I think that the overrated in terms of rankings where everybody's at. I think first round, this is generally what you're going to see. Then you have a guy like I like Xavier Worthy, Roman Dunze, Troy Franklin is in there. And the value of this class is definitely that wide receiver class, right? Then you have the running backs. Now, Travion Henderson hasn't declared, hasn't said he's not going to come back. So the question is there. Trey Benson has declared. There's a lot of guys in this area. I think the one thing you need to be concerned about or be hesitant with in the running back class. I see a lot of running back class is terrible. That's not true because a lot of these guys are going to find value, right? A lot of people didn't understand running back values this last year. Devin Chan, those guys, when they find a role and where they get drafted is going to be when you have the value for them. So I have a lot of guys in my second round because to me, they could find a role. Let's say Braylon Allen gets drafted by the Eagles and they move on from Swift. Braylon Allen's going to be a first-round draft pick in rookie drafts, right? So be very hesitant with that idea that these running backs are all bad. That's just a bad narrative to follow. And especially in December, man, we don't know that. It's just a narrative people run with. They get clicks and they're happy with it. And I'm the first one to say that maybe I've made that mistake as well. But just be careful with that, right? So you can pause it. You can look at the top 36. But this generally gives you an idea of some of the players out there. There's going to be some that pop up. There's going to be some sleepers out there that definitely look really good. Puka Nacua, Tank Dell, those type of guys. But this just gives you kind of an idea of the top 36 according to my board before opt-outs, before all those crazy things happen. Now, let's get into quarterbacks. So when we're looking at pick value, so these are guys. So the top guy on these slides that you see when I list them is the elite, the number you could trade one up for, right? So if you have the 101, the 102, would you trade Trevor Lawrence for it? That's what I'm looking at here. Obviously, we're not talking about Burrow. We're not talking about those guys. What we're looking at is would you be willing to do that one-off switch, right? So if you have the 101 right now, would you ship that for Trevor Lawrence? I don't think a lot of people would do it. I think Trevor Lawrence is a declining asset. In terms of people's value, not in terms of what I think. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to probably a buy this offseason, to be honest with you. But would you flip it, right? So would you flip the 101 for Trevor Lawrence? But where's that line go? Would you flip Marvin Harrison Jr. for Trevor Lawrence? Depending on your roster in a Superflex league, right? I think 103 is probably my limit for a Trevor Lawrence. But then it gets interesting, right? Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray. Where do you put those pick values in there based on kind of these quarterbacks? And where are you willing to re-roll, right? Now, as far as me, I think the tier is at 105. So where is that 105? If you can move Justin Fields right now for Drake May, would you do it, right? And I think that is the hesitancy for dynasty managers, the struggle with where it's at. To me, 101 to me is I'd keep it over Trevor Lawrence right now. I'm doing a dynasty mock right now for the channel with the 24 class included. Caleb Williams went as quarterback 6. right? Trevor Lawrence went as quarterback 11 or 12. So when you're thinking about the value relative to that, I think it's really starts at Tua, right? I think Tua is like, all right, where 102, 103, where do you feel comfortable moving on from those guys, especially in Superflex? Now, I do have some deals out there to show you. Brock Purdy for a first, a third, and Will Levis, right? Brock Purdy's probably reached peak volume right now and value in terms of dynasty and where he is at. So might be a time, if you believe in Will Levis, you get a top 5 pick in there for that 24 first. That's part of it. Like, I would probably think about maybe moving him. Some people think Brock Purdy should be QB6 in dynasty. You know, I was on Reddit, which is a weird area, but it's pretty funny in dynasty. And some guy was saying he believes he's a QB5 overall. So there is people out there that believe in their value there. Then you have Justin Fields for Derek Carr and a first, right? If you want to get out of Justin Fields, are you comfortable moving for Derek Carr, who I don't even know what his value is next year? He's probably a starter, but you're looking at that floor, and then you get a top 5 pick, right? Let's say you have a top. I would only do this deal if I had a top 5 quarterback already. Justin Fields is my QB2, and I'm like, hey, I can kind of re-roll, get Carr, and then go get an elite asset. Even then, I'd be hesitant with that, but that maybe is the play here if you're trying to get out of Fields. And then Jalen Hurts for T. Higgins, a first and a second. Jalen Hurts is that interesting one because a lot of people are down on him in terms of if they get rid of the tush push, where is his value, right? We don't know if they're going to get rid of that, but then you get T. Higgins, maybe you get a top 5, maybe you kind of re-roll with with Caleb if you can get him in there. Probably not Caleb, probably not there, but maybe Drake May or Jaden Daniels in a second, and you're really rebuilding. Maybe this is the route you go. I do think T. Higgins, if he finds another team, is going to increase in value and you can move them then. So in a rebuild, I don't necessarily hate that deal. Next couple, Dak Prescott for a first and Kirk Cousins. Justin Herbert for a first and Jordan Addison, and then Joe Burrow for Kyler Murray and a first. These are all fun rebuild re-rolls, right? So maybe you can get a top 5 pick with Kirk Cousins and Dak as your QB2. And again, these are all deals that did happen in 12-team Superflex, but it's happening right now with no trade deadline. So think about that too. These are some teams moving, trying to go win, vice versa. So just kind of give you context so you understand. Herbert for a first and Addison. Again, would you rather have Drake May or Jordan Addison or Justin Herbert? Right? I think with the new offense coming in, what do you expect from Herbert in that offense? Now, the running backs are interesting, right? So when we're thinking of pick value, mid to late first guys, I don't think a lot of guys are going to move for early first. Maybe Bijan and Gibbs are the only ones there. So then I think the top one, so if you're sitting at 106, let's say it's outside that top tier, would you move 106, 107 for Travis Etienne? Would you move it for Kyren Williams, Kenneth Walker, Saquon, James Cook, and Rachaad White? So this is the question. Like, if you're sitting there and you're that retooling, not rebuilding, but retooling, you have these guys in your roster, would you be willing to reroad? I think that there is a value this year. So heading into this offseason, I want dynasty managers to start thinking about this. Maybe you re-roll, you trade Travis Etienne for a 106, you get a Jaden Daniels, you get a Roma Dunze, you get a wide receiver, but then you use some of that draft capital late, third, seconds for these veteran running backs. There's guys going out there like Saquon's going to be out there, but he's kind of that elite value you're looking at. Eckler, and you're looking at Josh Jacobs. You're looking at some of the Kamara. Some of these guys that you could probably get for seconds and thirds. Maybe you re-roll. You get a elite wide receiver that you believe in this class, right? Maybe you can get Neighbors or something like that. And then you just go and target the veteran running backs that are going to be cheap forever because they just throwaways. They're just throwaways in that area. I really think that's the strategy you should be using this offseason. That's what I used this last offseason to see if it worked, and it tends to work. So just go target them, and I do think that you can re-roll, go get those elite wide receivers, and then just kind of pick up these running backs, these veterans. And even these veterans, Rachaad White's probably going to have a value drop. James Cook is probably going to have a value drop. Kenneth Walker, once you start seeing these Charbonnet puff pieces about him doing well in camp, is going to have a value bump next year. So there are ways to get running backs instead of just drafting them. Now, as far as deals that are going out there for first right now, Ty Chandler, Alvin Kamara for a first. And again, Ty's coming on strong. This is definitely a contender. And getting that first for him, I think is a good move for both sides. I do think both of those running backs do hold value. And you're giving up a first, but you're going to go try to win a championship. Kyren Williams for Brian Robinson in a first. Interesting. Kyren Williams, we talked him on the Dynasty show, Football Guys. Where do we have him ranked? To me, once you get out of the top 5, once you get out of the Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, Gibbs, Bijan tier in there, for me, it's like, they're kind of negligible, right? I don't really necessarily care. What are they going to do for me next game is really what I care about. So if I can get a first in Brian Robinson, and Brian Robinson to me is a running back too, if it's a top 5, it's a 105, 106, 107, I don't hate that deal, right? But I also get it from Kyron's side too. Then you have DeAndre Swift in a 24 first. That's probably a late first. Don't hate that. I do think there's value based on the big board at the end of the first round. Now, next one's first for James Cook. I would like that to be a mid first, though. I'm not trying to sell for late. If you can get a first and a third for Tony Pollard right now, I think you have to do it. If you're not contending, like if you're going that's a perfect reroll. And if you can get someone to give you first for Javonte Williams right now, I think that is the move. Like anything from 110 or higher, if you can get into that range, for Javonte, I think you have to do it based on just his outlook. There's so much production out there you can get from some of these veteran guys. Now let's go to the wide receivers because I asked early on in the season who would you rather have, CeeDee Lamb or Marvin Harrison Jr. I think it was 75% said Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, based on what CeeDee Lamb is playing and where he's probably wide receiver one in terms of like in some people's rankings or at least the top three, he's finally in the tier with Jefferson and Chase. I don't think you trade the 102 for CeeDee Lamb. I think you keep CeeDee Lamb, but I think there are some people that would actually like having both those guys or actually maybe prefer Marvin Harrison Jr. So there is something to note there. Then you get into Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson, Olave, Jalen Waddle, A.J. Brown tier. So who would you rather have, Marvin Harrison Jr. or those guys? Probably Marvin Harrison Jr., right? And I love Garrett Wilson. I love Jalen Waddle. But I do think when you're looking at the value, Malik Neighbors, I think is going to sneak into the Olave range, depending on where Malik Neighbors kind of goes. Tyreek Hill, I think there's some value to be had to move him. I know he's looked really good. He's a tough one. He's like the dynasty purgatory, right? Nobody really wants to pay up for Tyreek Hill, but they love having him on his roster. So that is kind of areas. I'm going to show you some deals involving him, the way you can kind of move off of him and collect that value there. Now, Christian Kirk for a first for T. Higgins, right? So when we're thinking of wide receiver wise, if you can get a Kirk first and in T, that's a perfect deal. I love that deal. I absolutely smash that deal on the Kirk side. I like Higgins though. I get it. I know some people are going to really like him, but I like that value that you get there. Cooper for a first, absolutely smash that. And in Cooper Kupp, I think the one thing that's interesting for this one is I still think Cooper Kupp's a value, but I would only get him for a second. Like I'm only looking this off season, looking to get him. This is obviously someone extracting that last bit of value coming down the stretch, getting that first. I really have him going in that second range right now. So if you're selling Kupp and you want to kind of get rid of a first, that's fine. I don't like to give up all these assets though without getting something back. Like I love the Kirk deal. Like if I can get an asset plus a first back, that's really, really what I push for. Then you have Devontae Adams a third for a first. Again, Devontae's that age cliff is teetering out there. We have Javonte there. I already put that one in there. And then Tyreek for Christian Watson and a first, right? So Tyreek Hill that's the way to kind of move off Tyreek is if you want to get someone back. Now, I'm not a huge believer in Christian Watson, but there is a plenty of guys in that Christian Watson tier that you might be able to throw in there, like, and get a first back for like a Tyreek Hill. And you have to look at guys that you think are going to have maybe another breakout, right? Maybe you can get Dotson thrown in there, or maybe, if you really believe in Jameson Williams still in that range, Marquise Brown. I don't love Marquise Brown based on what we're going to probably see. The Cardinals take Marvin Harrison Jr. possibly. Zay Flowers, maybe you can sneak in there, right? Someone in that range that you can add to a first for Tyreek Hill. That's definitely how I would kind of move off of him. Now, tight ends, when you're looking at this, all mid first, not a lot of guys going in there. The top tight end of the 24 class is Brock Bowers. But when you're looking at what would you trade off of, you probably not moving Laporta straight up for Brock Bowers after what he did. TJ Hawkinson is the interesting one. I love Hawk. I like him in this offense. But if you want to get younger, maybe that is the one-off deal that you look for Hawkinson and Bowers in there, depending on where he goes. I've seen some mocks where he goes to Tennessee. That'd be disgusting, right? You wouldn't be excited about that. But just have to play it by ear. Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, I think it's interesting. I think he finds himself at like the 103, 104 mark. So I could see some guys doing deals like that. Hard to move off from McBride, to be honest with you, but Kincaid might be that guy. Mark Andrews for Bowers, I think, is a realistic possibility. And in Travis Kelce, yeah, if you can get him at like the 105, 106, I think this is the time to move off of Kelce. Now, when we think of like deals going for him, 24 first for Travis Kelce. If you can get a first at this point for him, I think you kind of have to. The decline is here, right? And I think it's not that he's not good still. It's that he's getting old. And you guys know, as I'm getting old too, I'm 34. you get injured, it takes just so much time for recovery. I think the big thing with him is that his injuries are just taking recovery time, right? Miss me with that Taylor Swift nonsense, miss me with that stuff. He's old and takes his body time to recover, right? Isaiah Likely in a second for a 24 first. I think that, I just want to put Likely in here. I like Likely, but again, he's still sitting there as that tight end 2 of that offense. And then Cooper Kupp and Njoku for a first. I love it for both sides. I actually like Njoku in the Kupp side a little bit. I think that you're buying Njoku being a top 10 tight end. You're getting Cooper Kupp. If that's past the 108 mark where I can't get Bowers anyway, I'm all aboard that. I think that's a fantastic deal. Then we have Jake Ferguson for a first. If you can really get a first for Jake Ferguson, I think you have to think about that. I think that in that offense, they're going to add to their wide receiver room this offseason. So just think about it. Mark Andrews for a first and Cortland Sutton. Again, I think I like both sides, but I do like the Mark Andrews side there. And then Trey McBride for a first. If you can get McBride for a late first, I think at this point with what he's been able to do, I think you really have to do it. So again, I just wanted to kind of show you just what's some trades out there for first, where you should be kind of looking, just the narrative too of the big board, looking at like the top 36, understanding where the value is at. Wide receiver is truly where the value is at right now. There's other quarterbacks that could push up some guys like Quinn Ewers if he comes out, JJ McCarthy, some of those guys. And then don't just sleep on the running backs. I think that's a mistake. I think that, yeah, obviously the talent like Gibbs and Bijan aren't there, but there are some very, very good depth pieces if they find a role in an offense that could do very, very well. So appreciate you guys. Check you guys next time.